We know that democratic words and forms have been written into laws. But it is the way people practice democracy that really counts.
This is it. In thinking seriously of democracy, one must define his words carefully and use them consistently. When you have your own definitions clear, you know exactly what to look for in a community.
Many students agree that two important signs of democracy are shared respect and shared power. Let's take shared respect first.
For more than 500 years, American Indian people have been subjected to the ever-changing whims of the white man, who with sword in one hand and Bible in the other, swept across this land like a plague of locusts.
The struggle for black people is an old, old struggle for full citizenship in our country. Its angers, its revolts were ignored and forgotten.
Hitler's concept of concentration camps, as well as the practicality of genocide, owed much, so he claimed, to his studies of United States history, and he often praised to his inner circle the efficiency of America's extermination.
Because there are things more painful to people, more destructive than what happens to the body, but they're much harder to see. The fear, the confusion, the hopelessness, the quiet crying inside of people who are not allowed the basic rights of human dignity.
In their efforts to deal with the original inhabitants of this land, the European and then the American governments tried many different approaches. First they tried subjugation. Then when that failed, extermination. And when that wasn't totally successful, then came the reservations.
There are records of more than 100 successful slave revolts on the high seas. Men do not submit easily to chains, but their chains are not so easily broken either.
And the land set aside for reservations in the 1800s was generally the most worthless land that could be found. Indians were relocated to these lands for as long as the grass grows and the rivers flow.
What would you do if you were turned from human being into another man's property and treated like a beast of the fields? How would you feel? Even without reading or writing, even without the right to talk with each other in the fields, slaves found ways to express their pain and anger. What couldn't be said could be sung or shouted. A language of resistance the master could not understand, but is now a part of the cultural heritage of America. Because many believed what their great leader, Frederick Douglass, said.
I have held all my life, and shall hold to the day of my death, that the fundamental and everlasting objection to slavery is not that it sinks a Negro to the condition of a brute, but that it sinks a man to that condition.
They signed up the Indians who were assigned to that particular reservation. They took a roll, as it were, at that time. Everybody was given a number so that they could identify the people who were reservation-bound Indians, because reservations and the inception were no more than glorified concentration camps. Indians were forbidden to leave them. And so you were given your tribal identity right then and there by the United States government.
The roaring, rushing drive to own oneself was bigger than the fear of being caught or killed. The story of slavery in America is a story of dreadful oppression and of heroic resistance to that oppression. Our story began the day the first slave ship left Africa, and it cannot end until the last chain of slavery and its scars have disappeared from our land.
Political winds shifted and extermination began to fall out of favor. Assimilation became a new byword of a concerned citizenry, and so an educational model to make Indians into imitation white men was proposed. The centerpiece of this plan was the Indian boarding school system designed by former Indian fighter Captain Richard Pratt. His motto, "Kill the Indian, save the man," was the central philosophy which destroyed Indian families and societies by sexually violating and brainwashing generations of Indian children into believing that their language, culture, clothing, and their very identity was evil. In actuality, the effect of the boarding schools was far more devastating and far-reaching than its creators ever conceived. It is now recognized that the boarding school experience has affected multiple generations of Indian people with such symptoms as alcoholism, drug abuse, incest, sexual abuse, and other major dysfunctions. Almost every Indian person alive today, no matter how successful, carries the residual psychological scars of yesterday and must grapple with the question, when it's all over, will I be Indian or white?
It's a little known part of history, but it is a reality. And nobody's ever really addressed it. Nobody's ever really talked about the Holocaust here. I mean, there were conservative figures, 19 million Indian people living in North America. 19 million. And by 1970, there were 260,000. They didn't move to Hawaii, you know, or they didn't go to Sweden. Where did they go? They are gone. They were gone. Killed. Murdered. But 19 million people. That's not a Holocaust.
This is our symbol. It's an Indian mother, a Spanish father, and a cat with a mustache facing it. On one side of us, we predate Plymouth Rock 20,000 years. On the other side, 300. Yet we're told to identify with what's coming from the eastern seaboard. But again, you say, well, that's past. It has nothing to do with us today. But it has a lot to do with us today. It has a lot to do with us, with the culture that our people have had is going to the graves with our old people. So that we have to start relating to who and what we are. It's not alienation, it's movement, self-determination. The Japanese, they have no political power, so to speak, because they're small numbers, yet they have economic control of their life, and what they develop, it goes into the majority society, but the money comes back into rich new blood for themselves to develop their own people. You know, this is because they control their church, they control their social life, and their whole living together. And I don't hear anybody saying the Japanese are alienated, but the minute a few black people get together, they say, man, those guys are bad. When Mexicans start to get it, they say, well, gee, they might think I'm a bad guy. You know, the hell with what they think. Because what they thought has created all the problems for the mass of our people. There wouldn't be any racism if his folks and his forefathers hadn't provoked it. There wouldn't be any discrimination if his forefathers hadn't provoked it and built upon it and created a status quo barrier to all other people. As we watch the black move, as we watch the radical Anglo move, and we say, you know, where are we going? We've got it all right here. We don't have to go. We just have to preserve it and build it up. We have to defend it. We have to take care of these things that are important to our people. It's right here. It's right here in my hand. My feet are on the ground, and this is who I am, and I'm proud of it.
Sharing respect means that each shares the respect of all. One sign of shared respect in a community is that everybody is given a fair chance to develop useful skills. Shared power. Most observers agree that there is true democracy in a community only if there is shared power. That is to say, only if many people have a share in making decisions that the community will support. More specifically, you can say that power is shared wherever regular popular elections are authorized and are actually held.
I am, then, both visibly and legally, the descendant of slaves in a white Western country, kidnapped pagan who was sold like an animal and treated like one, who was once defined by the American Constitution as 3/5 of a man, and who, according to the Dred Scott decision, had no rights that a white man bound to respect.
1950s, the federal government instituted yet another new Indian policy known as termination. The purpose of this policy? To eliminate tribal governments and tribal lands, along with any vestige of tribal identity, so that the Red Nation would become part of America's great melting pot.
These are refugees. They're not refugees from Mexico, they're refugees from displacement and from economic exploitation in the rural areas. And they've come to the cities to look for work.
The only thing white people have that black people need or should want is power. And no one holds power forever.
Whenever any group can vote in a bloc and decide the outcome of elections, and it fails to do this, then that group is politically sick. The cornerstones of this country's operations are economic and political strength, and the black man doesn't have the economic strength, and it will take time for him to build it. But right now, the American black man has the political strength and power to change his destiny overnight.
The Black Revolution, with its high drama, both inspired and somewhat obscured the more localized protests of Mexican-American groups. They are now demanding the rights of citizenship and full participation in the economic, political, and social life of this country.
Our own people.
Now the kids are learning different. They don't have to take abuse from anybody. They're as equal as anybody else in this God's country. Our kids are just as smart as anybody else's kids given the opportunities. And we wouldn't be fighting so hard if our parents before us would have done what we're doing for our children. But they always told us this is the way they are, this is the way we have to accept it. When I would come home and tell my dad, I was brought up in Brighton, went to school there, they were very prejudiced against Spanish and Mexicans. And I'd come home and tell my parents, and they say, well, this is the way it is, you have to accept it. We found out we don't have to accept it. And our kids are not going to. We're not going to settle for this for our kids. We're going to work with them and teach them our new way of life, which is our right. We have just as much right here as anybody else in this country, or more, because we funded it.
Program isn't in the hands of the people. The power, is at the top. It's held by a corporate elite, and that the country is organized to protect the corporate elite.
Shared power. That is to say, only if many people have a share in making decisions that the community will support. There is shared power if office holders are drawn from representative groups in society. Office holders who are drawn from representative groups of the community.
A very important element in shaping the behavior of people is what we want to take a look at today. Attitudes are tied in with feelings, beliefs, opinions. People have feelings, beliefs, opinions, or views about all sorts of things. The way people feel about things determines, to a great extent, what they do about them. It is common knowledge that everyone develops attitudes, and the important thing to bear in mind is that behavior is influenced by them.
Well, you've seen Godfrey Cambridge's game. No. I think it's called Ghetto. It's a similar principle, and you start out in a ghetto, Watts or Harlem or someplace over there, and you aspire to get to be president of the United States. Oh. It's a very similar format and sort of tongue-in-cheek.
You don't aspire to get busted.
No. The idea of protest, you can choose to protest on a college campus, or you can choose to protest before the state welfare department, or you...
I think you weigh the evidence. I don't think it's a numbers game. You try to
You try to evaluate different opinions. You try to judge the background of the individual expressing an opinion about it. You try to weed out those who are perhaps anti-technology anyway. They'd be as much against an electric toothbrush, if you will, as they would be against nuclear power plants. It's a lifestyle with them. You have to, I think, take that their opinions into some context. You have to weigh that against the great body of scientific knowledge in Western civilization, which pretty much has put an imprimatur on nuclear power, certainly in France, certainly in England, Russians now.
Any incident. What turned incident into disorder? The violent response of our own institutions, the excesses mainly of the police and the National Guard. But the Commission also blames local governments for being out of touch with their Negro minorities, for failing to respond to the signals of ghetto grievances.
Right. The only people who concern me, who cause me any anxiety at all, are the people who I think are in fact determined to destroy an institution. Who, it seems to me, are prepared to say that because a hospital doesn't save the life of everybody who comes into the hospital, we should burn the hospital down.
Keep the status quo! Keep the status quo! Keep the status quo!
I was explaining to someone this morning, Bob is our man who's there to see that the interviews are carried on, but in every other respect, the situation's in the hands of the police commissioner. And this is what I think so many people in the university community don't really appreciate, is that if it's necessary to call in civil authorities to conduct the affairs of the institution, you surrender something of the institution's autonomy.
Do you think the plant should be built here?
That's absolutely.
You do?
Yeah, why not? Who's going to stop them?
Well,
you got money enough behind you to push it?
There are a lot of people who are opposed to it, sir.
They're opposed to it, but hell, they haven't got nothing behind them to push it.
You mean they have no political base?
No, they haven't got the finance to push it.
They don't have the money.
That's right.
Uh-huh. And the big...
If you got the money, all right. If you haven't...
The President was talking generally, and generally, if this happened anywhere but a college campus, there just wouldn't be any discussion about it.
See, this it seems to me is the really critically important point to get across to our colleagues, is that we have for centuries in institutions like this enjoyed a degree of immunity from civil procedure because the assumption with the public that we would somehow or other govern ourselves, maintain our own form of law and order. And this included lots of gatherings and demonstrations and so forth that the minute you call in civil authorities to maintain order on the campus, you begin to live like people live in the rest of the world.
Attitudes are definitely an important factor in police performance. Your attitudes and those of the people you contact. There is a point which you as a police officer should always keep in mind. It is a very important point and one which has far-reaching significance for your success in dealing with people. The point is this: the way a person reacts to you depends to a considerable extent on what he thinks your attitude is. Notice that I did not say his reaction depends upon your attitude. What I said was, it depends on what he believes your attitude is.
The news media, the newspapers, and television for the same thing. Also for making the riots seem more like civil war than they were. Partly by overplaying Negro violence, by carrying hasty reports from city officials on the amount of damage. I remember getting and using damage from Detroit, a figure that has since proved 10 times too high.
Well, civil disobedience has been with us for a great many centuries. I think one could go back into Christianity or other religions and find a great deal of civil disobedience. The difficulty with it is where you draw the line. What's right for you and what you believe is right for mankind, you may not share with me, and I may not share with you. I may not like your lifestyle. I may decide that where you live is endangering me, and I may go over and put a match to it and say, burn it down. I'll be very careful to go when there's no one home, but...
crack him, or even hit him with your gun. That's physical abuse. But there's another kind of abuse, and this, I want to submit to you, is very important. I want you to be very careful as you go about your work and observing this one. That is, don't commit it. And this is what I would call emotional or spiritual abuse. You see, you may never hit me, but if you don't respect me as a man, this does me more harm than hitting me. I'd rather you hit me so I could, you know, fight it out with you, man to man. But do not abuse my person.
But what you do is based upon your concept of reality. You cannot actually see an attitude. All that you can do is make inferences from the behavior that a person holds a certain attitude. Now, the inferences you make about the attitudes of a person with whom you have contact help to determine the way you react to him. On the other side, John Q. Citizen's reading of your attitude helps to determine his reaction to you. If it appears to you that you are facing a man who detests police or who regards you with contempt, your reaction to him will be quite different, naturally, than it would be if he seems to be reasonable and respectful.
The Negro ghetto is a mystery to most police, except as a source of crime. But the Commission suggested that police start looking at it as a place where people live, with all the problems that poverty and alienation bring. The police, they said, must broaden their view of their role as law enforcers to include many welfare functions.
For his part, the citizen reacts to you also, according to his judgments of your attitudes toward him. In this respect, there is nothing essentially different about police and citizen contacts. Attitudes play a similar role between people in all walks of life.
As long as the process is working, that I can newspapers, that I can appear on in a film and say what I want to say, or I can go to an AEC hearing, that I can band together and get with my to express my points on the Vietnam War or detente or nuclear power. As long as that process is reasonably open, and I think it is reasonably open in the United States, then I have to be fairly confident about the future.
The Commission is critical, finally, of Negro militants who heated up the atmosphere of the ghettos, made them more receptive to lawlessness, and exploited the disorder once it began. But the report concludes there is no evidence that any riot was planned or instigated by any Negro organization, or that riots in any city were caused by outsiders.
It would be, I think, wrong of me to do that, and I think perhaps it's wrong to destroy private property. I think there's plenty of opportunity for a full airing of this plant without having toppled that tower. And I do want to say that that is a very private opinion from an individual. My company has been very careful to take no stand on this and did not prosecute Mr. Lovejoy and did not appear in court. This was an action with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, so that is a private opinion. Very difficult line, civil disobedience. Good for Gandhi, but perhaps not good for then Adolf Hitler.
You know, I hate to think that democracy is a failure. I can't bring myself to believe it. I think we just have to work a hell of a lot harder at it than we've been inclined to in the past. I think we've taken it for granted that we had such a stable, such a sensible form of government that nobody in his right mind was going to set out to destroy it.
Judge Smith had gone to great lengths to ensure a fair trial, partly because, as he noted at one point, this is probably one of the strangest trials ever held in Franklin County. One of the minor issues of the trial set Lovejoy free at an unexpected moment. He was charged specifically with the destruction of personal property, yet he had found and shown in court that the tower had been taxed and the bill had been paid as if the tower were real property or real estate. On the 7th day of the trial, the judge indicated that he might throw the case out of court because of this flaw in the indictment. The first person to argue against this was Lovejoy himself. The judge, however, was insistent in his desire to dismiss the case. At 2:50 p.m., Judge Smith called the jury in and instructed them to find Samuel Holden Lovejoy not guilty. In the days that followed the trial, the jury was polled by the local newspaper. They not only approved, by and large, of Judge Smith's decision, they also indicated that they thought the prosecution had failed to prove malice on Lovejoy's part.
These are the major proposals. On welfare, a new approach, a form of guaranteed annual income, based on the idea that even in good times, some people can't get jobs or can't make enough to support their families. On housing, a national open housing law, 6 million new low and middle income units, especially smaller buildings in scattered locations, instead of high-rise projects jammed into the ghettos. On jobs, 2 million new jobs in government and private business, better chances for advancement through job training subsidized by federal payments or tax credits. On schools, grants to promote integration, but until it really happens, a special compensatory aid.
By showing that there is nothing personal in your actions in an adversary contact, you will focus the hostility of the people on the system and not on you personally. This will also help you avoid charges of brutality, rudeness, or lack of courtesy.
Enlightenment. Making information available to citizens and giving them the skill with which to judge it. As public education increases, democracy grows.
It was important, more important for us, to point out to people that Dow, and not just Dow, but all the corporations in America, participate in a system that is oppressing people around the world and oppressing people right here in America.
The process really has gone on for 100 years. That is, as soon as we began to have in this country what you call an industrial revolution, as soon as you began to have mines and mills and steam, and as soon as the companies began wiping out the forests, and as soon as they began pouring wastes into the rivers, we began to have an environmental problem, just the beginnings of it, but didn't pay much attention to it. And civil disobedience was directed at other things. Now, the enormity of what they are doing to us, the very air we breathe, the very water we drink, the very space we occupy, and now with the special dangers of atomic radiation in our kids and leukemia and all of that, the time is right for people who are against this to really do their act of protest for all of those people who in the past 100 years were not able to feel the issue deeply enough or did not have the capacity or the ability to do anything about it.
It is a terrible and inexorable law that one cannot deny the humanity of another without diminishing one's own.
God knows I would be kind, let live, speak fair, requite an honest debt with more than just, and love for Christ's dear sake these shapes that wear a pride that had its genesis in dust. The meek are promised much in a book I know, but one grows weary, turning cheek to blow.
The effort to influence the public mind by the use of money and the media and the press without an open ability to debate that issue, that is a conspiracy. In spite of the profound character of the decision that has to be made, public debate has not even begun. And indeed, the very authorities, both governmental and industry, involved in making this decision have simply prevented that public information process from occurring.
Cesar Chavez set out 3 years ago to win for California's vineyard workers privileges and rights that working men elsewhere had been enjoying for 30 years or more now. Elementary democracy, collective bargaining and union recognition, a fair wage and decent working conditions. California farm labor makes $4 billion with the help of an estimated 300 to 350,000 Mexican-American agricultural workers. With the help of a powerful lobby in Congress, illegal alien scab labor from Mexico, and a curious exemption from the National Labor Relations Act, most growers have held out against concessions.
It was about the necessity of civil disobedience in times of danger to life and liberty and health, and how historically in the United States we have seen many, many times how the ordinary institutions of government, those hallowed things presented to us in the 4th grade as the 3 branches of government, are really very inadequate in protecting us, as we've seen from the number of wars we've engaged in, from the number of people who have died in industrial accidents, from the number of people who have been exploited in this country by corporations. These governmental institutions have not been very adequate to protect people, and from time to time, when grievances became too deep, groups of people had to go outside the machinery of government, had to break the law, had to commit civil disobedience in order to dramatize something that was happening. This was done by the labor movement. It was done by black people at various points in our history, and before the Civil War and the Underground Railroad, in recent years in the Civil Rights Movement. It's been done by women in protesting against inequality. And it seemed to me that after the most recent acts of civil disobedience, that is against the Vietnam War, maybe the time is right now for people to look closer to home at the dangers to our lives posed by corporate control of our lives.
A nonviolent response has certain kinds of presumptions that I don't happen to believe. It presumes, in effect, that we're dealing with moral men. That somehow people are going to be moved by the fact that 100 or 150 beautiful people get arrested tomorrow. We're not dealing with moral men.
I mean, it's sort of hard to sum up Northeast Utilities because they're sort of this amorphous group. It's just a holding company of sort of big mucky executives that sort of think that they're deciding the future of the energy needs of America their own way based on profit. And I just don't look at the needs of America as being based on profit. I think they're based on need and on what's available, necessity.
But if we were in a society that was moral, if we were in a society where all people had civil rights and civil liberties, if we were in a world where all people had civil liberties, then I would say nobody should violate your civil liberties at all. But when you're living in a society that's corrupt, that's amoral, that exists to make profit, that puts one man against another man and calls it motivation, then there's no right to respect one type of civil liberties. People like to call us communists and say we're a bunch of reds because then they don't have to deal with our politics. You see, that just can't, they call umpires communists too. Then they don't have to deal with us if they just say you're communists. But the communists are not the people to be worried about in this world right now, because the communists are just another form of imperialism. The communists are imperialists just like the United States are imperialists. There are varying degrees and varying types of communism. Communism in Vietnam may be totally different and will be, I can assure you, totally different than communism in Russia. Okay? So we're not for the communists taking over the world. But what I'm saying is that the United States and Russia are in this conflict, and they're screwing everybody in the world because of this conflict, just to help their own countries, to help themselves. And not even their countries, to help an elite in that country.
Oh God, the long night of hesitation, frustration, filibuster has been so awfully long.
Right, all the way from Selma town. Right.
There comes a time when people get tired.
Right.
And we are here this evening to say to those who have mistreated us for so long that we are tired.
Help him, Jesus.
Right.
We are tired of being segregated and humiliated.
Amen.
Right.
You seem to think that everyone who goes through high school and then doesn't join SDS doesn't read books or something.
No, that's not true, man, because I went through high school.
No, it's not
too,
true. I think for myself. I don't get these opinions because some teacher told me they were supposed to be my opinion.
What you're saying right now shows me that you're ignorant of what it means to be socialized, to be put into a system. You see, the system has affected me. It's warped a lot of my thinking. It's created a lot of anxieties in me. There's certain things I can't do, like I don't like to say certain words because it makes me turn red every once in a while, and things like that. the thing you have to try to do is first recognize that it doesn't matter what society you live in. That society determines your morality, what you think, the ideas that you're brought up with all your life. The time is now, man. The time is now to say, well, maybe some of those things aren't right, and let's look around and see what the truth is.
Tired. Did you hear me when I said tired?
Yes, Lord.
Tired of being kicked about by the brutal feet of oppression.
Oh, Lord.
Right, right. Now we have no alternative but to protest.
Oh, tell it, tell it.
For many years, we've shown amazing patience.
Yes, Lord.
Right, right. We've sometimes given our white brothers the feeling that we like the way that we are being treated.
No, no, Lord.
Right, right. But we come here tonight to be saved from the patience that makes us patient with anything less than freedom and justice.
I grew up with the signs, no Indians or dogs allowed, and had to abide by those signs, not being able to go into places. And so from the very time I was very small, I think that I learned that you had to be strong in order to be an Indian.
We've been forced into the boycott because of the fact that when you strike California agriculture, if you're taking on the entire structure, in this area we have to take on the courts and the police. Almost every political subdivision is against us, so we got to take them on with the employers, because the employers really by and large still at this point owe
Human rights. Respect as human beings.
The God is forcing us to do. We are glad if they give us a chance to have an election and let us decide if we really want the union or not. Because I keep saying a lot of times, we ask you for one chance. We don't ask you for $1.40 or $2, $3 an hour. We don't want nothing like that. We don't need any favor at all. What we need to do is a piece of paper and let us to say we want union. We don't want union.
They want to live in a free and open society where they can walk with their heads up like men and women.
And that's why we're trying to show our kids. You see in this bus, a lot of small people, the children, they come here with a purpose. They learn, because I know our fight is going to be very, very long, because the girls, they have the money, they have the lobbyists and everything else. So even if we don't get nothing, our kids is going to keep fighting. So that is the main deal, to show our families to fight and to stand up for the rights, saying that when they're small.
Keep on talking, Lord, I'm marching up to freedom land. Ain't gonna let Jeff Clark, Lord, turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let Jeff Clark, Lord, turn me round. Well, I keep on walking, Lord, I keep on talking, Lord, I'm marching up to freedom land. Ain't gonna let no dog, Lord, turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let no dog, Lord, turn me round. Well, I keep on walking, Lord, I keep on talking, Lord, I'm marching up to freedom land. Ain't gonna let nobody, Lord, turn me round, turn me round. Turn me round, ain't gonna let nobody, Lord, turn me round. I keep on walking, Lord, keep on talking, Lord, marching up to freedom land.
Because a lot of the times the Holocaust is perpetuated by our own. And it's not necessarily the outsiders. I mean, we've learned our lessons well. We've learned how to be divisive. We've learned how to take the tools of colonization and use them on ourselves. And we've done that very well, thank you.
And the Holocaust goes on today. People are dying all over the world. There are Geronimos all over the world fighting for their people. And dying sad.
It's like draft resistance. Remember draft resistance? How people are going to turn in their draft cards, you see, and then first there were going to be 100 draft cards turned in, and then there were going to be 500, and then there were going to be 1,000, and then there were going to be 10,000, and then there were going to be 100,000. Only that ain't the way it worked, because it's finite. The number of people willing to put up anything, yeah, for what they believe in. That number is finite. On this campus it's small, and in the country it's small. We are. We're not a majority, anything like it. Yeah? Martin Luther King said, well, they'll fill up the jails. See, first they'll fill up 10 people, they'll put 10 people in jail, and for every 10 people they put in jail, there'll be 20 to take their place, and for every 20 there'll be 200, and for 200 there'll be 2,000. It just ain't true. The choices really aren't between violence and non-violence. Yeah? That's an artificial choice perpetrated by the powerful upon the powerless. Yeah? They want you to think that what you're doing is choosing between violence and non-violence. You're choosing between various forms of violence. The ghetto is a form of violence. Yeah? What the corporate elite does to the people of this country is a kind of violence. In Guatemala, yeah, where they pay Indian peasants 30 cents a day and a pound of meat costs 40 cents a day, that's a kind of violence. Where people don't get adequate medical treatment, that's a kind of violence. Yeah? I hate to see us deluded into thinking that that we had some kind of real choice here, as much as I'd like to have that choice. Because what happens in this system is the word comes down from the top, yeah, and everybody follows. Comes right down top. There are no decisions coming from in the other direction. Okay, there are people think we can somehow get in this community what Felix Frank was fond of calling an aroused conscience by getting busted. Let's get busted. Yeah, but we're gonna learn from getting busted, and that's mostly what I care about. Thank you.
What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink meat? Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet?
Maybe it just sags like a heavy load.
Or does it explode?
And when the dynamite does go off, pious pronouncements of patience should not go forth. Blame should not be placed on outside agitators or on communist influence or on advocates of black power.
It takes no one to stir up the sociological dynamite that stems from the unemployment, bad housing, and inferior education already in the ghettos. This explosively criminal condition has existed for so long, it needs no fuse. It fuses itself. It spontaneously combusts from within itself.
We are being forced by police misconduct to get together to fight the police. You know when I believe that singing "We Shall Overcome" is an effective way to fight the police? When I see you send your Marines, your airmen, and your infantrymen into Vietnam, led by the Mormon Tabernacle Choir.
I believe in anger. The Bible says there is a time for anger.
I'm the only person that doesn't claim to be American Indian, because American Indian is only 500 years old, but I was here before Columbus. So that doesn't make me American Indian. So I'm a non-Indian, nor I'm a non-American. Today, America, nobody knows what America is, and nobody knows what Indian means. So the only Indian that was defined by Congress is primitive or North American Indian. But then what is primitive? Anything that goes by itself is primitive, but when you put a fence around it, it's not primitive anymore. So then what is Indian? 93rd Congress changed its tune to what is Indian to who is Indian, so only half would be regarded as Indian. So American Indian cannot be defined as a nation. So American Indian, as long as we're labeled American Indian will be written never, never, and never be recognized as a nation.
The concept of recourse was paramount. There is no recourse. And so then I had to decide how to approach the tower as the symbol in the most effective way to communicate a giant political issue to the local residents of the town and to the county, to the whole Connecticut River Valley area, how I could communicate to them the dangers, the issue of nuclear power, and the dangers of nuclear power, and the whole problem of nuclear power as a giant political issue when no one was looking at it. And so I decided that, one, I had to knock down the tower, and yet, two, I had to realize that the people around here, one, don't realize that they do have recourse, but the recourse isn't necessarily through the established means, because sometimes the established means just don't work and the odds are totally against you. Yet I did not want the people in the area to get hung up on the property issue and the whole concept that someone would destroy property in order to stop a nuclear power plant or anything else. So what I wanted to do was get these people to think about the issue itself, nuclear power plants, and therefore I would put my existence on the line and just turn myself in with what I thought was a well thought out statement, and people would then realize that I was being responsible.
The law is not a holy thing. I remember when Dan Berrigan broke the law and they interviewed his 80-year-old mother and they said, "Oh, what do you think about your son? What do you think about him breaking the law?" I guess they thought an 80-year-old woman would have 80 years of respect for the law behind her and she'd give them the right answer. And Dan Berrigan's mother said, "It's not God's law." And she had it there. The law is made by very mortal people, very limited people, very opinionated people, and people have very special interests. They make the law, they tell us what the law is, and then they act as if it's holy writ. So, it's not a terrible thing to break the law. I'll make the statement as simply as I can. Far more violence to human life has been done in human history by people obeying the law than by people breaking the law. The greatest acts of damage to human beings have been done in conformity with the law, in conformity with government edicts and government decrees. The greatest harm to people has been official harm, not the harm done by ordinary citizens.
No. That's the reason why I think that the jury would have acquitted him. The Commonwealth didn't prove the point that he was malicious when he did it. And I don't think he was. I don't think he's that type of man. He did that, in other words, he figured he'd sacrifice his own life, you know what I mean, for the existence of the community in this area.
Right.
In other words, he was going to be the sacrificial lamb. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
He didn't care what happened to him. All he cared about was just the community at large, the generation and the generation to come.
I always think that behind technical reasons in the court are substantial human reasons. And behind that technical decision of the judge based on is it real property, is it personal property, was a kind of moral pressure that the judge felt in the course of the trial put on him by the defendant and all the friends of the defendant, and the atmosphere of the courtroom and the feeling was that, by God, this was the right thing to do.
I find the word Native American offensive to me. It's like, here's a nation of people that enslaved my people, stole my culture, tried to beat it out of me, and now they're going to include me. And I don't mean to sound unpatriotic, I'm a veteran, but they're saying now you can call yourself a Native American. I'm not, I'm an Aboriginal, indigenous person. As Indian people, we have the responsibility to care for our own, to care for our young, take them in no matter what blood they have. If they're ours, they're ours. That's a simple answer. You can't say, you aren't enough of me, so find your own way. That's not what it's all about. We brought them into this world.
So what happens when this young guy comes up to the drum and he looks black and he says, my father is such and such and my mother is such and such and I'm Indian? What do you say? And I want to learn the song. What do you say to him? And he said, you better make a place on the drum for him and have him sit because he's one of us.
With respect to the citizen, there, I think, is an unwritten law beyond things like the Declaration of Independence, which speak of our inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I'd like to raise the question, when even a government or even a majority vote does things that may poison an individual, may poison his children and his children's children, is he not entitled to some effort to defend his rights to life, his children's rights, and their descendants, no matter what the Democratic majority has decided, particularly when the Democratic majority has made such a decision, if they have, based upon the perversion of truth, the purchasing of truth with money and advertisement and vested interests.
People forget that when we fought that revolution 200 years ago, we fought it in the name of the Declaration of Independence, and the Declaration of Independence said, governments are instituted for the purpose of protecting life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That was the phrase, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Then when the revolution was over and they set up a new government and they wrote the Constitution, they did not use that phrase in the Constitution. They didn't say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They said life, liberty, and property. That tells you a little about the Founding Fathers and their interests. And in a sense, what we have to do in this country, of which this environmental action is part, we have to move that enormous distance, and also that short distance, from the Constitution to the Declaration of Independence. You could almost define where this country has to go by saying we have to move from life, liberty, and property to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
In America means freedom, liberty, life, and then property. Politics means people taking a political stand. It means a yes or no. It doesn't mean a bunch of foo-foo lobbying saying, no, I don't want this and I'll counterbalance this. There's no negotiation here. That's politics. That's saying there's no way that they can be built safely and therefore there's no way they're going to be built. It's like saying we're going to have a safe war. I'm saying there's no safe wars. I'm saying there's no safe nuclear power plants either. These people are going to start to realize that, and when you take a concrete position, that's politics. When you take a social position and start to develop yourself as a social creature, that's when you get political. You're not a lobbyist anymore. You're not taking little negotiatory stands. You're saying no.
My mother was only half Apache, but that's always, I've never felt like I was anything but Apache. It was always because my father was always singing and always teaching us about Apache, so I felt like we were Apaches, and that's all we were. And I think my mother felt that way too, because she never said anything about being white. It was always Apache. Everything she did. She made dresses and she beaded and made purses and all kinds of things, and she made those, and they were Apache. And that's what she wanted to teach us, to dance Apache, to sing Apache. And that's what I'd like to give to my children, to help them to realize that they're Apache. And one of the things we went to was something in Oklahoma, and there were all these people in their minks, you know, and their tuxedos and their formals and everything. And my daughter asked me, she said, "Mama, how do you feel? You're wearing an Apache dress, you know, and all these other people are all dressed up." I said, "I feel like I'm the most beautiful person here." I said, "Because I'm Apache." And that's the way I feel.
Being Indian is not being part. If you're Indian, you're Indian. You're not just, you know, a part white or a part Hispanic or anything else. You're Indian because that's how you feel. When you grow up and you have an Apache mother or a Comanche or whatever, if she's 15 tribes, but she sings the lullabies to you of whatever tribe she feels, I mean she knows, then you're going to feel the dominance of that in your life. It's kind of like that's going to be your choice.
So I think there's another way to look at that whole issue of what is Indian and what, you know, the word or what we call ourselves is en Dios, meaning in God, that the people that they encountered were godlike, were very pure. And that M Dios became Indio, which became Indian. We have lost so much blood, and so many of us have died over the name Indian, that he says we've earned it. And we've earned that name with our blood.
I'm proud of my people, and I'm proud of who I am, and what they did and what they stood for. You survived. We've always survived, and we're still surviving.
They gather in their taverns and sing songs that nourish their culture. A traditional pride makes them resist the assimilationist impulse, makes them refuse to tear the language from their tongues. My land is lost, writes a young poet. My culture has been raped. I limp from the lines at the welfare door. I shed a tear as I watch my children disappear behind a shroud of mediocrity, never to look back to remember me. The music of my people stirs a revolution, the poet sings. Whatever I call myself, Mexicano, Latino, Chicano, whatever I call myself, I look the same, I feel the same, I cry and sing the same.
Esa paloma no es otra cosa más que su alma. Que todavía le espera a que regrese la desdicha. Que van a saber